Welcome to Connected, Automated, Electric, a podcast series brought to you by the National Electric Vehicle Consortium. You will hear experts from industry, agencies, and academia describe the broad spectrum of technologies that comprise the EV sector with a particular focus on preparing the skilled technical workforce. These technicians work in all of the EV sectors, including manufacturing, operations, system installation, and charging infrastructure. I'm your host, Mike Lisecki, and let me remind you that the opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsor, the National Science Foundation. Our guest today is Ken Mays. Ken has taught in Central Oregon Community College's Automotive Technology program for over 25 years. I've known Ken for a number of those years, and I realize he's been a pioneer in expanding that program first into automotive alternative fuel technologies, and then ultimately into electric vehicle technologies. Ken, it's just a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. I spoke just briefly, but Ken, tell us a bit more about yourself. What drives you? Some other interesting things that our audience might want to know.
Well, thank you, Mike. And it's so good to be with you. You do a great job. And I've been looking at your other podcast and think highly of this.
Thank you.
I'm a part of the National Electric Vehicle Consortium, and I'm also the PI on a grant called NevTech Next. It's an NSF ATE grant, and this is the third one, excuse me. We're planning a fourth. But my background really comes from an automotive background. I started volunteering, helping people with their cars back almost 50 years ago, and then just continued at a community college level, finished at the community college and went to work, bought a corporation, built up that corporation, and then moved to Central Oregon, got the job at Central Oregon Community College back in 1990. It's been a ways. So have built this program up. And the last degree that we endeavored to build was something called Automotive Technology and Electronics and Diagnostics, which includes electric vehicles and controller systems and the array of things. We went with a name that would be versatile instead of just call it an electric vehicle. We wanted to have something that could move over the years because you never know what's going to happen in the automotive transportation world. So we went with that. So I have retired in the last 3 years, and that has given me opportunity to work with colleges all over the country to encourage them promote electric vehicle transition. So that's what I'm doing through the National Science Foundation, and it really has been a joy.
Ken, you're still an instructor at Central Oregon, aren't you?
No longer. No, I offer my available experience, but they've hired some really great people, and they just tell me, "See ya. we don't need you anymore." And that's fine. That's fine. I get a chance to do what I promised I would do with my wife. We would travel.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it. You know, in your role, Ken, community colleges from around the country, not only those associated with the grant that you mentioned, but others, they always approach you, I think, and say, you know, how do I start my program? How do I grow my program? What happens when a college approaches you? How does it all work? And what do you tell them?
Well, it's very similar to our Mentor Connect program. And the Mentor Connect requires your administrative people to be involved, et cetera. I do the same thing. I say, if your administration is supporting you, behind you, then this will happen. If they're discouraging you, then probably not. But different parts of the country have different requirements. So if we were working with a college in, I'll just make this up, in South Carolina, they don't have as many hybrids and electric vehicles as you do on the West Coast. So we approach it a little bit different. We look for resources. What is the resource that you have? Do you have vehicles right now, or are you going to have to look for those? What equipment do you have? And so we have a checklist of things that I go through. And then is the instructor, the important part is the instructor willing to learn how to work on these new vehicles. And that's really a 10-year process.
You know, Ken, is there instructors that you just mentioned? Are there workshops that they can go to, or are they on their own? They learn by doing it themselves? How does it all work?
Well, there are many opportunities to gain in electric vehicles. Really, what we're trying to do is build relationships and coach them towards going towards the EV Pro Plus program. And that's encompassing a multitude of levels that they can get into. But there's a program that's available 64 hours called Access on Demand, and that's through Future Tech Auto. And I encourage them to log on to Future Tech Auto, subscribe to the 1 year series of podcasts, and really, it's really where they're going to gain just the best intro before they get started in their program. And that's what I do over and over again. Start here, get your instructors involved in this whole process, and then see where it's going to go before you invest the big money.
Speaking of money, does it cost the instructor to be part of that?
Yes, yeah, there are different levels and there's a different cost to that, but it's really a great value because you're getting a lot of preparation before you show up at a live
Yeah.
practical event.
Right.
And so it's just like taking a college course. If you remember a college course, if you're not preparing, then you're going to fail. You got to be ready for these things.
Ken, there must be a spectrum of colleges, those that have, let's call them pure automotive programs that don't yet have electric vehicle technology. So they approach you and they say, Ken, am I going to have to go out and buy some electric vehicles? Are my local dealers going to donate them to me? Do I need to invest a ton of dollars, which our department doesn't have, in diagnostic equipment? They're worried about these things in the beginning. What do you say?
Well, a typical automotive program gets donations and solicits donations for their program
Yeah.
ongoing
Yeah.
through their foundation, through whatever means, wrecking yard, state surplus, etc. And so they have to look for those. In this case, they're looking for electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles to include in their rapport of cars that they have for students.
Sure.
But they have available resources. But you can start advertising. That's what we did. Advertised in the paper, advertised on Craigslist. Said we're looking for car donations at our college for these things. And people who don't want to repair their hybrid or electric vehicle just donate it.
Yeah.
It usually works out.
Yeah. What about the diagnostic equipment? I mean, isn't it all about vehicle diagnostics on the EV side? I mean, is it true? I think it's true that the vehicles are mechanically simpler, but yet they must be complex on their electrical side.
That's exactly right. And over the years, we've worked on 20 years, 22 years of Toyota Priuses. So we have diagnostic equipment that we had to purchase. Some of that came through grant with Mentor Connect,
Uh-huh.
with Next Grant, NSF, ATE. We went to our state grant system and found, these $25,000 grants that the state offers for a one-page application. And so all of those things are available. The resources are really unending. It's just a great, and people want to support you. They want to support electric vehicle transition.
Okay, got a hard one now. One cannot read today's newspapers without hearing endless number of things about autonomous vehicle technology.
Sure.
So, what about our technicians in our 2 year degree programs? What do they need to know? Do you send them over the IT department? How do they get those skills needed to manage that sensor network on a vehicle that ties into the management system of an autonomous vehicle? That seems complicated. I'm
Well,
nervous. I'm a community college faculty member. I'm not sure I know enough about that stuff. You know what I mean?
Well, autonomous vehicles are here and becoming more sophisticated every year, especially with the on-road trucks. John Fralla, my friend out of Rio Hondo,
Yeah.
worked with Volvo at the Long Beach shore, and they had autonomous vehicles with no driver that would transport trailers from the ship to inland,
Uh-huh.
20 miles without a driver.
Yeah.
And it was just like a train going back and forth, back and forth. And technicians learn how to do that. He was teaching that at Rio Hondo. The great news is that sensors have been on vehicles all this time. Input devices have been on vehicles all this time. And you have output devices. What do they do? What do they control? And so we incorporate this, and that's why I call it controller systems. Once you start teaching controller systems, you can just add on and add on and add on.
Yeah.
But all the systems that are on there, and you get lots of stories, why things didn't work or something ran into somebody or that type of thing. And hopefully those are stories from the past.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll see a much more sophisticated piece. I'm sure AI is a component on the new designs that are coming out now, but I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about it. As I was down in Scottsdale, your neighborhood, I saw all the Whammo cars driving around Scottsdale and Phoenix, no drivers, just taxiing people all over the place, and they have done very well, I think.
I have to admit, Ken, my wife and I took the Waymo to the airport the other day, and she called it on her app, and it pulled up in our driveway, navigated very nicely through the airport traffic. It was pretty impressive.
You know what? You can tell it's a driverless car. It's robotic when it goes only the speed limit. It only
That's
goes to
right.
45.
I did
it,
notice that.
it doesn't go 65 and a 45. So it's funny to see that.
It's interesting as we think about these programs that now are incorporating electric vehicle technology into them. The programs are growing. It must be a good attractor. Students must find them an interesting field to work in. What do you tell them when they come to you? What are their opportunities? Certainly there's automotive, but I know in a moment I want to ask you about other electric technologies. But how do you encourage students to come in to an electric vehicle program?
Well, usually they have some inquiry, and you always had in the years past, you always had somebody that came from the farm, came from
Yeah.
working on their own vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. We don't see that so much anymore. So these are young men and women who are coming in, and women do just as well as men in this electric vehicle transition. My best example is all the great videos that Tesla puts out in their Tesla Start program, and they recruit women and men. They go and they come out of a community college program, hopefully, and then they move to an 8-week training program at Tesla Start, and they have a full-time job working someplace in the country. And
Yes.
they can move around the country. They can apply to different parts of the country once they're in the system. Very, very young people running Tesla today. So
Amazing.
that's just one example. The demand for electric vehicle technicians is very high right now. So if a student comes with some form of education, electric vehicle, they will put right to work. And the company that they go to work for is going to really love them. We're also transitioning to heavy equipment and trucks, on-road trucks.
Oh,
And those are, as you know, Tesla has their truck. Everybody has a truck. There's a conference that I attend, the Green Transportation and Expo up in Tacoma every year, and it's all heavy trucks. And they are challenged to create zero emission on-road heavy trucks. And
yeah.
that's a major task, but they're doing it. And the technicians are coming up. The EV Pro Plus program will have, it's rolling out a heavy equipment on-road truck certification this year, or a series of certifications this year. So this is all in the works. It's all happening in real time.
Can you just remind me of a question I had in the back of my mind? Does your program at Central Oregon or others that you know of, are certifications embedded in the program or is it apart from the program?
Now we embed, for instance, that new degree, that 2 year degree has 15 stackable credentials, which include on
Uh-huh.
the second year, it has electric vehicle, electric hybrid 1 and 2, controller systems 1 and 2. Each one of those is its own standalone certification. So
Uh-huh.
you can actually have people come from the community and just take that if they want that
Sure.
certification. But that's a community college certification recognized by the state. That's not the global certification that we're talking about on EV Pro Plus. So that's a very different level. I'm not qualified to teach that level. So
Uh-huh.
it's pretty impressive when you go to that. Dr. Quarto has been teaching this for the last 45 years, came from designing electric vehicles for General Motors, and he was a project manager. And He's now teaching this and is a consultant for PACCAR and other world companies. So he is really at the top of the line, and I have been following him for the last 12 years and developing, and that's why I support
Good.
what EV Pro Plus is doing.
Ken, we talked about opportunities for students, and I know you live in a world where you understand transferable skills, right? Today, our students have a base set of skills that can transfer into other related fields. Now, let's talk about an interesting one, aviation. Can a student with electric vehicle technology background move into the aviation field, or is it still a barrier there? And by the way, what is e-aviation? I mean, I'm not sure I actually know what that term means. I mean, I know what it means, but how does it work?
Well, it's a fascinating field. I love what e-aviation has done. I've worked with instructors out of Utah. Stephen Lay have taken the ground transportation global competencies for technicians for the standards that have been developed. But for ground transportation, we had a meeting. NEVC hosted us, as well as NCAT, two other NSF organizations, and we really had great outcomes with that. So, transferable skills is what the subject is. Can you take a person who's trained in ground transportation and move over to e-aviation? Well, now I think we share that there's a new category for e-aviation through FAA, and this is fascinating because they haven't ever done a new certification since World War II, and this
Right.
is this is an impressive moment. And the vertical takeoff electric vehicles is really just doing a great job. We're going to see these aircraft all over the place. Limited range initially, and I can't tell you what that range is right now because every company has their own. But the technician who's learned ground transportation can easily move in, and the equipment that is used for ground transportation can work on aviation just as well. And then there's a new emerging area, e-marine, and that
Uh-huh.
is a little slower coming online as far as global, but it is happening. And if you sit in these meetings, you'll see the emissions that are produced by aircraft, shipping. You see the emissions that are produced worldwide. And so there is a mandate to reduce these emissions, whether it's ground transportation, aviation, or marine. And it's going to happen. It's going to work, but it's going to require a pile of technicians to come in on board and work with these systems.
You think a technician going into a field like that might have a good electromechanical background, maybe a mechatronics background? Do they need to understand avionics, or will they learn that, or is that somebody else's role?
And as you know, in aviation, there are different roles. Different technicians work on different components of the aircraft. And so it's going to be the same thing there. They'll have specialty or, whatever their training requires. And I'm sure they have names for it right now. I think that the opportunities for a technician is just tremendous. And I would really love to see that happen. I'd like to be living long enough to see this whole transition take place. But I think in the electric world, and it's not just these three categories, it goes on way beyond
Sure.
what we're talking about today. I think that the biggest challenge is learning to work with alternating current on any type of system. That's a very different animal. We've all learned DC
Yes.
in our whole history of automotive, and now we have to transition to alternating current and learn that at some depth. And the math is very different. The understanding, the equipment, very different. And if you can learn that, that's the transferability that I'm talking about.
Let me let me probe that a little bit, Ken. Do you mean AC from the charging side or from a vehicle's systems that has a combination of AC and DC? What do you mean? Why do I care about AC?
Well, all the electric and hybrid vehicles run on an alternating current motor, all of them. And if you don't grasp that,
Yeah.
then you're going to not be effective in your job. So that's what I'm talking about. We
Okay,
still
the
have
main
a
power
we
engines.
still
Yeah.
still have controller systems on board for direct current. You have to have that.
Sure. Back to the e-marine. Where is e-marine today? Are we talking about a 2 horsepower electric outboard motor for your putting around on a lake? Are we talking about an underwater exploration vehicle? Are we talking about a bigger surface thing? What's happening in e-marine?
If you can picture an oil tanker running on a hybrid motor that
I'm not
just
sure I
like
can, but I guess it could. It
or
could be that.
a
Okay.
series of, you can have four of them,
Okay.
and you have that just like you have your locomotives. So it's electrical mechanical. It could have a diesel motor driving it, could have an electric driving it, just a number of things. But
Yeah.
you're talking large scale on these things. As I visited the marine industry down in Long Beach at their conference, it was everybody in the world was there,
Oh,
and they are developing these. Everybody has shipbuilding going on, whether it's South Korea, China, Great Britain. It goes on, and there are big ships being built with electric propulsion. And when you have an engineer on board to manage those kind of things, for the most part, it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple, but once it's working, but when it has issues, somebody's got to be able to step in. So
sure.
they
Sure.
they have onboard engineers who do this. And when we talk about engineers, these companies are hiring electrical engineers out of 4-year colleges, and they're getting grassed up pretty fast. And so you have those as your primary engineers, but you need technicians on the ship as well. And then you can go down to the 2 horsepower equivalent
Yeah.
on an outboard motor, of course,
Yeah.
just like you have an e-bike.
Yeah. Right. Right. Fascinating.
And the e-bike industry is just all over the place right now, but there are some certifications for e-bikes that do exist. And NEVC with Kevin Cooper is supporting that.
Uh-huh.
And they have people come in and do that certification, and it's good stuff. But once you kind of work with that system, once you kind of get a smaller electric vehicle, you can expand into a larger vehicle. And that's really the best thing. If you can experiment with smaller, then grow into it, I think you would really appreciate it. Just like we did with our, you know, 4-stroke outboard motors there early on.
Sure.
You start off with this and then you build from there.
I've got a funny question for you, Ken. I don't know why I just thought of this, but suppose you have someone that comes in to a program from an automotive background, right? They understand gasoline engines, the mechanics of it. They're likely to be a bit afraid of these wires that carry higher voltages and higher currents. I bet you they're intimidated by those things. How do you help them get over that? Do you have a specific safety course? Do you train them in specific ways for those potential hazards associated with the voltage and current? How do you manage that?
Well, we do have safety. Everybody starts with safety,
Sure.
and we wear 1,000-volt lineman's gloves when we're handling high voltage around orange wires on any type of vehicle. And we go through the process. What happens if this is what it's going to take to electrocute you, that type of thing. And
Yeah.
it's not much. It's not much.
Okay.
And so those are the kind of things that every community college offers, whether they have an EV program or not. They have to do EV safety,
Yeah.
and so they have done that. The one of the NSF ATE programs was the REVD project. I don't know if you've heard of REVD out of South Carolina,
No, I
Clemson,
don't know it.
and Trident Community College. They just finished their project, and it's offered for high schools and colleges to just come in. It's an online training program, but it's many hours, and it really just kind of gets somebody to settle down and see. And they include autonomous in that program as well. So they've done a good job, and those opportunities, people developing, offering, what can you do in your community college? One more tool that you can use at your community college. But back to your question, to have somebody who is coming out of, just like I was
Yeah.
a diesel gas technician, and I had to take a close look at this. Where is the industry going? And that's really what drives us. What's the industry going to do? And we sat back in our seats for about 10 years waiting to see if hybrids and electric were going to really
Yeah.
last. Were they going to last, or are they
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
just get thrown out the door? Well, they're lasting, and they're lasting really well. So we are already into it quite a bit, and that's not going to slow down. It's going to keep going. No matter what administration, what country, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We're going to keep going.
What's going to limit that growth? I mean, is it mining the rare earth metals? Is it the ability to recycle the batteries, which will grow? What's going to limit the growth?
Well, recycling is a hot item right now. One of my friends here in Bend, Oregon, Joe Merrill, has Second Life Battery. He just sold a truckload of nickel metal hydride cells at a pretty
Uh-huh.
good amount. And their nickel metal hydride is high demand right now.
Yes.
And then you take the lithium ion parts. Another company here in Bend, Oregon, Dr. Sleeve Sloop, has a lithium ion recycling program that he has worked at for the last 20 years, and
No.
selling it to the military, selling it to others, and all of these things are recyclable. But it's a great opportunity, and we've had students go to work for both of these folks that are
Okay.
doing really a great job. And so what I'm seeing right now, as we're looking at the opportunities, students can get into any facet of electric vehicle and batteries. But you ask what is going to be the obstacle: rare earth metals, etc. And
Uh-huh.
yes, when you have China doing 90% of that, that's an issue. But we're finding rare earth in our own country. Now it's a
Sure.
matter of mining it. You were seeing these happen. In fact, you're down in Arizona has some lithium ion projects going on.
They
So
do.
does
Yeah.
Nevada, Oregon. And we're not just talking about lithium ion, but we're talking any combination of these new metals that are required. And they're being sought out by companies worldwide. And I think we're going to be okay. It's going to take a little while,
Yes.
but I think we're going to be okay.
All right, good. Well, Ken, we're wrapping up today. And again, you've acted as a national resource. And I just want to thank you on behalf of all the colleges that you've worked with. And I think you're quite willing to have someone call you out of the blue and say, how do I build my program here? Is that true?
Anytime. And if you want to include my number on the screen, if you want to put my email on there, I get contacts every day. And I'm happy to give out resources, have ongoing discussions, try to encourage them to apply for NSF grants such as Mentor Connect, and look at the opportunities to get some funding right now. You're going to need some funding.
Yeah,
So I encourage them at every level, and it's been working so far.
excellent. Ken, thank you again. It was great hearing your very broad perspective, not only on the automotive side, but thinking about e-aviation and e-marine. It's a fascinating area. It's just a pleasure talking to you about this stuff.
It's a joy, really. And at my retired stage, just like you have a little retirement going on too. And this is
Yes.
what you do in your life. This is what I do in my life. And we still got a ways to go.
All right. Thank you again, Ken. As we wrap up today, if you're interested in networking with academic, industry, and agency peers in the EV sector, and participating in meetings, grant opportunities, and technical publications, join our LinkedIn group. And remember, connected, automated, electric.